Hello, this is Mordred Viking, and this is a very short episode, which is basically talking a little bit about the Battlegroups, which you can find in Steel Division Normandy 44, whereby basically I was doing a stream, and during the stream people are asking, how do the Battlegroups work? How do you make a combat deck? And I went into a fair amount of detail on doing this, and I thought, you know what, people on YouTube are probably interested in this as well. So what I've done is I've broken this piece out of the Twitch stream, and have just basically uploaded it here on YouTube. So it goes into a fairly detailed breakdown in precisely how the battle groups work, the units that you can get, what the unit stats are, how they apply to you, and generally we just go through building a single battle group, which is one of the German tank ones. And I really hope that this kind of information is of use to you guys, so enjoy. I will explain how this works. Let's create a new one, we'll go through the process. So when you're first creating a group, you can choose allies or axis. There are a number of different divisions that you can choose from. So for example, the 3rd Armoured, 101st Airborne, 2nd Infantry. The little flag here determines what country that belongs to. So these would be American units, French units, British units, Canadian, and then Polish. The Canadians tend to use a mixture of British and American stuff. The French tend to have a lot of French infantry, but American tanks. The British have some American stuff. I think they're household divisions, mostly American tanks. And the Canadians are a mixture. The Poles, I think, are also American tanks. I think the Poles do have some unique stuff. And then the Axis is all just Wehrmacht Germany. Then you will also notice there's a little icon here. That shows what kind of division it is. So the ones with the tanks are armoured. They will have more tank selections. Airborne will tend to have more air support. Infantry have more infantry and generally more artillery. And infantry tanks, they tend to have more armoured tanks rather than speedy tanks. And then mechanised have armoured transports, assault guns and self-propelled artillery. So, for example, my beloved Scotland is an infantry division. That means that I tend to have more infantry tanks, which is what the Churchills are, and artillery. We're less mobile, so we don't tend to move around as much. And this is something that really came to the fore yesterday when I was playing with Uldrahill. He was moving around super quickly, going and I was going, nope, slow advance, slow advance, slow advance. Admittedly, that was also partially because I didn't know about the fast move order, but yeah, that's the thing. My other backup unit are the Red Devils. That's for the really heavy air support, and in fact, for the Axis, my favourite unit for the Axis are probably the Luftlande. They're actually an air transport division, technically airborne, but they have the only dedicated anti-tank planes in the game. So even the Panthers, they would one-shot. Like the Typhoons are not. There are different designations of aeroplane. We'll talk about that in a minute. So let's pick a group that I have not done before. You wanted to see the Germans. Let's do the German. It's interesting. Let's do Rommel Zirkus. No, Panzerlehr. Because you can see the super heavy battle tanks there. So you'll see there's this grid system here. The lighter grid squares are the available units. So you can see the Panzerlehr, for example, has a lot of available tank selections, but very few Air Force. If we chose another one, so for example the Airborne, they'd have a lot more Air Force, a lot more infantry, and far fewer tanks, because they can't carry them. They can't paratroop tanks. Well, they can, but it's not very effective. So you then click on one of these squares, it doesn't really matter which one, and then you have this overview here, which has the different types of unit, and then a breakdown of the different units. All the icons around the tile all determine their attributes and abilities. So in the top left corner is usually their kind of role. So these guys are Recon. Recon units are specialised in Recon, can spot enemy units from further away than regulars, and identify it more quickly. They don't affect the front line, so you can have them acting behind enemy lines, nor are they affected by morale penalties of being in enemy territory. So you can cut people off, which is something Uldrahill did to me once or twice. Yeah, big multiplayer games would be a lot of fun with multiple players. Absolutely. I mean, I would absolutely love to get involved in that type of thing, for sure. Absolutely. Uldra could get revenge against Ben in this game. True. Uldra is actually really good. I'm quite impressed with how quickly he's embraced this. It kind of looks like Hearthstone. No, it doesn't. Alright, so the other icons, the 4 in the yellow circle, that is their armor piercing ability. If they do not have a 4 in a circle, they cannot pierce armor. The shield down here is their armor level, and the way that this works is the armor piercing rating here is their armor piercing ability at maximum level for that gun. So for the SPW, their maximum range for the armor piercing weapon is 800 meters. That means at 800 meters, they can pierce armor of 4 or lower. Then for every 100 meters that you get closer to an enemy, your armor piercing rating increases by 1. So if he got up to 400 meters, for example, his armor piercing would actually be 8. So he could take down far tougher tanks. And because these guys are recon, they should be able to get closer to enemies. And they are also super, super fast. Like, their main ability here is just basically running circles around enemy units. However, I don't personally, and this is probably from the Ruse days, rate armored scouts very much. I like the most important attribute for me for scouts is their stealth. If they can't hide from the enemy, they're not doing their job, because they're not giving me information. I'm not expecting the recon units to go to toe to tie, with one exception. The British airborne guys, whatever they're called, I was talking about them earlier. They have a unit called Pathfinders, which are ridiculous. They're a 10-man squad, which is like a regular infantry unit. They're recon, so that means they have really good stealth and really good reconnaissance abilities, and they carry anti-tank weapons. And because they have really high stealth, they can stealth through forests, then basically sneak up behind tanks. And because they're a 10-man squad, that means that they can they're basically more resilient and takes much more to kill them. Yeah, I think it is the Red Devils. I think. Yeah, I think it is. So those guys are really good. Those are probably the best of the recon units. But different groups have different types of recon. So, for example, the Panzerlehr, being a panzer division, has a lot more armoured recon. And the use for those is they can basically keep pace with the tanks, probably slightly behind the tanks, looking out over them rather than advancing ahead, because they don't have the best stealth. Although they are very fast, so you can use them to kind of spot enemies in advance, then pull back and run away. The problem with that is I don't actually know how far they can see. And that is a stat I would really like to see. Like, it does say optics high. How does that compare to an AT? Like, is the AT going to spot them and shoot them in one shot because they don't have great armor? Are they going to spot AT from further? I don't know. And this is one of the things that I think you have to kind of get a feel of while you're actually playing. Okay, so the other pertinent information here is the star. The star is experience. For every level of experience, they have, I think it's plus 15% accuracy, I was told. Experience improves various stats depending on the unit type. Accuracy, morale, rate of fire, optics. Oh, I see. So the more advanced guys have better optics skill. Huh. So the level 2 scouts are good because they can see further. I did not know that. Then finally, there is one more icon which is kind of embedded on the infantry units but not the others, and that is the transport that they arrive in. So these Spar troops have the SDKFZ 251, which is a mechanized unit. Which if I click on them and then click on the thing behind, this is their troop transport. So it has 2 machine guns. Stop going away. 2 machine guns, so it provides some heavy machine gun support. It's fast, obviously, so it can get the units to the front line very quickly, but it can't stealth, doesn't itself have optics. It's basically just a infantry support unit. These guys have jeeps. The jeeps just disappear once you arrive. Actually, the jeeps may not. The motorized units disappear. I think the jeeps actually stick around, and they're super fast, so they're very good at kind of chasing down enemies. Alright, so infantry units. The ones with a star are leaders. They get they give a bonus to resilience and fighting abilities of all units around them. Basically, the way they do that is they give them 1 extra level. So a level 0 becomes a level 1, level 1 becomes level 2, level 2 becomes, I assume, level 3. And they can really bolster the fighting abilities around them. They also tend to have better weapons than the regular grunt units, although it seems that the Panzergrenadier Führers don't. The Panzergrenadiers come with Panzerschreck, which the officers don't. American officers, I think, tend to have like submachine guns, and the British officers, I think, do as well. And in fact, no, the British officers tend to have anti-tank. The other interesting ability here is you can see that these guys are carrying anti-tank weapons, which is the yellow circle with the arrow in it. Breaching symbol indicates a powerful infantry weapon, only useful at close range, but usually with deadly effect. So if we click on it, we can see that they have an armor piercing rating of 3, range of 150. So really their armor piercing is 4 there. I don't know how effective they really are. I used to field a lot of armor piercing infantry units. I don't anymore. I much prefer the specialized anti-tank guns. Infantry tend to be for holding the line. They're usually pretty resilient. You can stick them in fortifications and things, which makes them much, much harder to root out. But they also have the most counters, like a single machine gun can pin down and destroy an infantry unit, obviously. And ranged artillery, like you saw me doing in the previous game. Once again, they have different transport types. I think all of these stick around. I don't know if the Jeeps do. So because these are Panzer Grenadiers, they tend to move Panzer Division, they tend to be very quickly. These are mechanized soldiers, so they will all come in mechanized units. Okay, now for these guys, their big speciality are tanks. You can see by the number of slots here that they can choose and field a lot of tanks. Oh, one other thing I forgot to mention. The ×2, the ×4, the ×3, that is the number of times you can field one of those units in these stacks. So for example, you might well want to field the Panzer 4Hs rather than the BF Panzer 4s because you get 4 fieldings for 1 unit slot rather than just 2. However, to balance that, these guys are experience level 2. They have same stats, but they are also officers, which these guys are not. Yeah, infantry is very good at holding towns. Like, infantry absolutely excel in urban warfare. Tanks are good in open areas, but struggle a bit in bocage, which is the Normandy hedgerows, which really obscures line of sight. And that was kind of a problem for my anti-tanks in some of the games. So we'll talk about the AT in a minute, but yeah, that's a thing. So with the tanks, the most important stats are definitely the armor and the armor-piercing ability. Tanks tends to kind of duel with other tanks, but they also tend to come with a lot of anti-infantry machine guns. So if you manage to get a tank amongst the infantry divisions against you, you tend to just mop up. This German division has a silly number of tanks, including some of the strongest. Among them, the King Tiger down here with 21 armor and 22 armor piercing. 21 armor is extremely tough to break. I mean, you basically have to park a Tiger almost next to the King Tiger to destroy it. But the 17 pounders with their 17 base destruction can destroy it from within 800 meters. So again, this is why I like the 17 pounders. So yeah, these guys have a lot of tanks, Panzers, Panthers, Panther Command units, Tigers. I think they might be the only one that can use Tiger. Oh wow, they can get 3 King Tigers. Yikes, that I had not realised. I thought that was just a phase C. Speaking of which, phases. There are different letters for each of these units. Most of the Recon will be phase A, a couple of Bs, and then the absolute elite in Cs. Much the same with infantry, but tanks, you will notice there are none for these guys in phase A. That means they cannot phase any tanks in the beginning. Each game is split into 3 sections, with I think 1/3 of the game occurring in each phase. So phase A, you will tend to have a certain amount of income. So for these guys, you'll be getting 75 resources every tick. I think a tick is a minute, I believe. And then you spend those on fielding troops. So in phase A, for example, if I were able to field one of these panzers, they cost 150. So I could only field one every 2 minutes rather than 1 a minute. While cheaper units like the Recon, I could get 2 of those a minute. And then the ones that can only be in phase B means that they can only appear from the mid-game later. Then the phase Cs are the ones that appear right at the end of the game. So the Panzerlehr are definitely orientated towards end-game play. They have very few points up front, like some will have over 100 up front, and then less as the game goes on. These guys start off weak, but as they get going, they get stronger and stronger and stronger, which is what we just saw against the AI when we were playing against these guys. Is early on we were able to push them back really quite easily, but then once they started bringing out the heavy armor, we struggled more. Until I brought out the 17 pounders, of course. Have I mentioned I really like 17 pounders? I'm not sure I have. Right, support. Support is the one category I'm a little bit unsure about. I am sure they are useful, but I find I use almost none of them. One exception being the supply units. Units do carry ammunition. They have a limited number of shots. I'm trying to see how many shots they have. So here we go. For the Panzer 4H, for example, they have 3 machine guns, each of which has 4,500 shots. It's a machine gun. They go through ammo pretty quickly. If they run out of ammunition, they can't shoot anymore, and that's where the support guys come in. This is especially useful for artillery, which I find does not come with much ammunition. So a really good strategy is to field an artillery gun, stick a supply truck next to it, and then they have kind of unlimited ammo. Unless, of course, the enemy takes out your supply truck. Yeah, I think both the Allies and the Axis have one group which is 150 in the late game. I think it's the armoured Spearhead guys for the Americans, I think. Okay, so what other units do these guys have? Well, they have the SDKFZ, which I think is basically a beefier version of the troop transports that they get, so a little bit ambivalent about that. This one seems to be... this is a high explosive, so this is an assault gun. So they are very good at rooting infantry out of buildings and forests. Then this guy is an officer. So in case you don't have enough officer units, this is a very quick, very mobile officer unit rather than fielding the actual tank officer units. They're probably also cheaper. Yeah, 45, they're very cheap. So remember, officers increase the level by 1. These guys being level 2 already, they'll be pretty effective at what they do. And then... Flampanzer, these are Flamethrower Punters, again, extremely effective at killing infantry at fairly close range. And then the grill is artillery, so why these guys appear here and not in the artillery tab, I don't know. Maybe that's just to give you a bit more versatility? That could well be. That probably is it, actually. If you want to field more artillery than you're supposed to, you can probably sacrifice some of your support for artillery. Anti-tank, my favourite category. There are usually different types of anti-tank. For the Germans, you have the pack units, which are basically just an anti-tank gun. The strength of their millimeters determines their armor piercing. These guys obviously have very high armor piercing capabilities. Nothing quite to the level of the 17-pounder, naturally, but they're not bad. Shows their transport, so when they first arrive, they move pretty quickly. After that, they're kind of slow. And also, they do have a stealth rating, which for these guys is medium. So they're not as good at hiding as infantry, but you can stick them in a forest. And they do tend to be kind of invisible unless the enemy has some pretty decent recon. And that is why recon is so important. Recon is so important. Like, don't ever ignore recon. Trust me. Things will go horribly wrong, because you can't shoot your enemy if you can't see your enemy. You can't see your enemy if you have no recon. Then they also have infantry units, so some of their infantry has got anti-tank capabilities, but these guys tend to be just better at it. These are dedicated Panzerschreck. They have a strength of 2, which means it's only 2 men in each of these units. They're kind of squishy, so I've stopped using the infantry anti-tanks, and I much just prefer the big guns. And then finally, these guys get the Jagdpanzer, which are tank destroyers. Tank destroyers also appear in the anti-tank category. And they are among the most heavily armoured tank destroyers in the game. Tank destroyers tend to have less armour, but they still carry a big gun, though not as big as the Pak 40s, for example. And they're mobile. That's their really big advantage, is they can move around. I think they have like stupendous frontal armour. So yeah, in the front, bullets will just bounce off of them. So they're very good at just frontal assaults. Hit from the side or from the rear, though, they are very squishy. And you can see here this little overview of where their armour is. So from the front, they have armour of 14. Like, only the most powerful guns will be able to penetrate. And I think there is also a random chance of bouncing. So they have got shaped armour, which means that a hit will just bounce off. Whether that is tied into the shield or the armour rating, I'm not sure. I have seen a lot of tanks taking bouncing damages, usually the more heavily armoured ones, so I don't know. I don't know how that's modelled. I would assume probably is modelled. This seems to be relatively accurate. Okay, anti-air. Anti-air and air, I've got a bit of a love-hate relationship with these guys. So a bit of backstory. In Ruse, I tended to play as the British or the Soviet Union because they had the strongest air forces. I loved using air forces in that. But air forces in this seem to be rather less powerful because there are significant timers on how often you can use those aircraft, and they tend to be squishy as hell. Like, 1 unit of flak is probably enough to basically deny your opponent air cover. So that is something they need to tweak, in my opinion. There are different types of anti-air. You have the regular flak guns, which are these guys. They are also extremely effective anti-infantry weapons. Like, the Germans tended to use these as anti-infantry quite often. And their job is basically just to put a wall of lead in front of any aircraft and then just let the aircraft fly through them. It just shreds them. You also have the Gepards here, which are mobile, so if you find the enemy air force is targeting a certain area of the map, you can react to that more quickly. Well, these guys have stealth, so they can hide in forests. And then there are different powers of this. So some of the bombers will tend to have more armor and they are more resilient, so you will need bigger guns to take them down. That's where like the Flak 41 comes in. In fact, the Flak 41 famously was used by Rommel in the African campaign. He basically realized these are really, really big guns. He didn't have enough anti-tank guns, so instead of pointing the guns up, he started pointing them horizontally. And they were surprisingly effective at killing tanks, and that's why they have an armor piercing of 16. So these Flak 41s, and this is kind of unique for the Germans, double as anti-tank weapons as well. So in a pinch they will do, but they tend to be quite expensive. But these guys get quite a few of them. I'm going to assume like the airborne get more. Actually, I don't know. No, the infantry probably get more of those. Okay, artillery. There are a couple of different categories of artillery. The most important thing to look at is the top left corner here. That is whether they can have indirect fire. So line of sight is extremely important. You can often screw your anti-tank units and your tank units by line of sight. If the enemy's hiding behind a building or behind a hedge or a fence or something, you can't shoot it because you can't see it. These guys don't care. So long as you have Recon who can see the enemy, they can basically act as a spotter, and then shells will come zooming in from above. Some of the artillery, however, do not have that ability. You will see instead that they have this radio thing. What's this? A tank in the artillery. What the hell? Well, this is kind of an interesting unit. Yes, they act as a tank, but very often they don't actually have the main gun. This is kind of lucky in that they do have the main gun. They replace that with an observation tower. What that does is it permits off-screen artillery. So this is like the heavy artillery rather than the field guns, which is what these guys tend to be. They have unlimited range and can hit anywhere on the map, but they have timers in much the same way as air do. Though I think their timers are actually lower than the air, so this is another reason that they kind of suck compared to... Sorry, that air sucks compared to them. So you can't shoot them down. You can, however, destroy the observer. If the observer dies, then the artillery unit that was with it also dies. This is an extremely expensive artillery. It costs 190 for the off-screen artillery. There are different types of off-screen. The Germans can get railway artillery, which are like super heavy artillery and can basically just deny an entire area. I think that the off-screen artillery, I haven't used them too often, rather than just firing one shot like the field guns, will fire multiple. It's like a whole barrage. And then there are different orders that you can give, like fire for effect, direct fire. I think you can fire smoke as well. And again, the benefit here is they have virtually unlimited range. It depends on how far this unit can see, and I think that depends on how good their optics are. So this unit having high optics and level 2 means they are going to have an extremely strong range. So you can still kind of park them behind your front line, but they're a freaking tank. They're still going to be hard to kill. So this is a very resilient artillery piece compared to, say, the Wesp, which has an armor of 3, but does have a very long range of 240 meters. This isn't actually 2 guns. It would say times 2 if it had multiple guns. This is instead showing the different types of shell it can fire. You can tell it to fire high explosive or smoke. Smoke obscures an area so you can advance with infantry and stuff. It's something I haven't really used enough of, and Ultra Hill tells me is super powerful, so there we go. I'm the only one streaming this game, really? That genuinely surprises me. Cool. Yay, go me. Okay, and then finally you have the Nebelwerfers, which are just awesome. They are rocket launchers. They are World War II rocket launchers. The cool thing about these, they don't just fire one shot. They're like choo 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 and shoot lots and lots and lots of bursts. They probably have a fairly hefty reload. They use high explosives, so they are terrible against armoured units. But there is nothing better at killing infantry than these guys. I just felt like I should point those out. And then you'll also have some of these mechanised units, which look a bit bizarre. You would think, how on earth are these guys artillery? Well, it's because they actually have a mortar parked in the back, or they have a rocket launcher on top. There we go, we can see the mortar on this one. So they're very mobile artillery. These guys don't tend to be able to move. They won't have as far range, but they work excellently as infantry support artillery. And there are a couple of other categories of gun, like one of the German guns is an artillery that you can put in a building, which is kind of interesting because it makes them very hard to root out. It's technically called a support gun rather than artillery, but there you go. Okay, Air Force. This is one category I've spent a lot of time like observing and checking out the different units and kind of getting an idea of what I like the most of. How did I get access to the Panzerlehr? I have a preview copy from Paradox and Eugen System, so I have access to all of the divisions, which you guys may not. In fact, you don't. Once the game is released on the 23rd of May, I think it's the release date, you will have access to them all. You can indeed put support guns in buildings here. But that's just the small little support guns. I don't remember exactly who has them. The infantry divisions probably do. But support guns can go in buildings here. Okay, so Air Force. First of all, you have Recon planes. They work in much the same way as other Recon units, but they're in the sky. So if they don't have anti-air, then they can't tend to shoot them down, but they are extremely flimsy and can be shot down relatively easily. Also, they have fuel. So if they run out of fuel, they dock off the edge of the map. But if the enemy doesn't have enough anti-air or doesn't have any fighters in the sky, then aerial recon can be pretty decent. Personally, I prefer the ground recon because I like hiding in the trees, but that is a thing you can use. Then you have the crosshairs. That denotes that they are a fighter. They are specializing at killing other aeroplanes. So that means that aeroplanes can be targeted by AA and fighters, and you don't tend to be able to field very many. You'll notice that all of these cards say 1 or 2 compared to the tanks where you get like 3 and 4. They really need to do more on the aircraft, I'm afraid. Anyway, fighters. They're very good at shooting down other planes, but they also have multiple machine guns, which are very good at strafing infantry units and also anti-tank units. Semicon, thank you very much for the follow. I appreciate that. So yeah, fighters are cool. And also one thing which I found out, which I did not realize, is fighters tend to have way more ammo than the other planes, meaning that they can keep going. They can strafe one unit, and then strafe another unit, and then strafe another unit. They're just by far the most versatile planes. So I'll probably be switching a lot of my anti-tank planes into strafing planes, because I do tend to struggle to like root out infantry, and anti-tank especially. Like I need an anti-tank weapon, and aircraft seem to be pretty good at doing that. Then we have the light bombers. These are bombers that don't tend to carry very big bombs. These guys have 4 of them. They are mostly an anti-infantry weapon. You can probably destroy some of the lighter armor because you're hitting them from above, and they tend to have very, very weak top armor. But in my experience, they're not really worth it. They get 1 shot, then they have to go off screen, refuel, rearm, and that takes like 4 minutes. In which time, if you have a single artillery instead of one of these guys, that artillery is fired multiple times, and you just reload it with a supply truck. I want to like Air Forces. I love Air Forces in these types of games. They're just super underwhelming right now. Okay, then there is another category of aircraft, which is multiple little bomb icons, which I can't show you here. That is a heavy bomber. Heavy bombers tend to be very resilient. Okay, that's something else I should talk about, actually. But heavy bombers tend to be very resilient, which means they can absorb some anti-air fire. And they also tend to have machine guns for anti-fighter ability, but they struggle a little bit. They have multiple bombs, and they can basically do bombing strafing runs for destroying stuff. And yeah, Luftländer is my German regiment of choice. Like, the German unit that I use the most is the Luftländer. I think they're really strong because they are unique. They get a unique plane, which no one else gets, which is amazing. I'll talk about that in a minute. The heavy bombers also tend to have heavier armament, so they can probably take slightly heavier infantry, slightly heavier tanks, but they're still not dedicated anti-tank units. Then you have the close air support, or rocket aircraft, which is what the Typhoons were, if you were watching the game I was just playing earlier with the Scottish division. Those are dedicated, well, they are better at anti-tank destruction. They still can't kill the really heavies, but they can certainly take out the medium tanks, just not the heavy tanks. They are also better because they tend to be able to shoot at range, so they are less threatened by anti-air, which is nice. And then finally, you have the tank hunters, which are only, as far as I'm aware, only in the game as the Luftländer, and they can take out the heavy tanks. So if you're up against Luftländer and you're playing as the Panzerlehr, be prepared to lose a lot of stuff to aircraft, because they can get a fair number of them in the sky as well. So outside of the Luftländer's tank busters, I think you're probably best off going with fighters mostly because they have so much more versatility compared to the rest. But the Luftlander anti-armor is very strong, and I had a lot of fun picking off isolated tank units. The problem is, of course, you have to take out the AA and fighters first because they are kind of squishy. Speaking of squishiness, stats here which probably matter a little bit more for these guys than for some of the others. Resilience is how much damage they can take before they are themselves destroyed. So fighters don't tend to be very resilient, though these ones actually are. Yeah, here we go. These ones aren't. These ones are. So beware of anti-air defenses when you're using these. And then the other thing is agility. Agility is basically how good they are at fighting other fighters or other aircraft. So these guys are excellent at shooting down other planes, while these ones will be not quite as good. They're still good. While if you're comparing that to the bombers, for example, oh no, they are good as well. So they'd be pretty good at dodging incoming fighters. That's because these are fighter bombers, I think. They have a lot of machine guns. So yeah, there you go. Actually, I guess you could use fighter bombers. You just turn off the bombing capability. You can individually toggle which weapons they are using. So I guess if you want your fighter bombers to be in the sky for longer, you just toggle off the bombs until you actually need them. That would probably work. Yeah, the timing is really hard just because of how squishy the aircraft are. And it's not like they come back. If you lose your one plane that you have paid 184 an entire Air Force slots, then it's gone. They need to do more. They really need to do more. Like, yeah. Rearming needs to be quicker. If you're good enough to avoid anti-AA and if you're good enough to avoid AA or fighters, then it shouldn't take very long to rearm the plane. Right now it takes too long, in my opinion. Anyway, this game is still being balanced and polished, so I'm sure that's the type of thing that they're looking for feedback on and will hopefully address. Okay, so here's my question for you guys. Do you want to see me playing a game as this German unit, or do you want me to play as one of the ones that I've already created in the past, which I'm a little bit more comfortable with? I'm still going to be playing everything on easy, so I can see how it works. Ponceler, yeah, it's locked for you guys, but I have a press copy, so I have a preview, and so I can share this type of thing with you. It's my privilege. Play the new division. So this is going to be very tank heavy, so you're going to see a lot of armor going on. I might see if I can find a map which is fairly open, so you can see tanks at their best. And we'll need to do a little maneuvering and moving around and trying to get some flanks and things like that as well. Alright, let's do the new one. So first of all, obviously is Recon. Now part of the question here is how much am I going to be using infantry? Probably not as much. Your units do have 10 strength. They do generally come with anti-tank. So self-made, you're not too shabby. You're pretty well equipped. So I think, yes, we will take several of these Recon. Probably 2 of them in the Phase A, because we get 4 per selection here. And then we'll probably take some of these. I would say probably the 3 in Phase B. We'll take 2 of those so that we can have Recon going up with the tanks. And I still like these. Should we get some mechanized? Slightly more expensive. Sure, we'll get some mechanized as well. Alright, infantry. We definitely want the Panzer Grenadiers, because they're strong. I think we're going to take the Panzer Führers, so we have a couple of officers in the field. Do we want MGs? I don't think we want MGs. We have enough units that can do anti-infantry that I don't think we really need to worry about those. And then I think I'm just going to take some of the later stacks of these guys. So you guys have frag grenades. You have flamethrowers. Flamethrowers are really good anti-infantry. Let's go for some Storm Pioneers. We get 6 choices of those as well, so that sounds good to me. Well, it's not to everyone. I mean, like I said earlier, I seem to be the only one who's streaming this. And also I spoke to their PR people at ParadoxCon. So it's not what you know, it's who you know. But seriously, Paradox are really, really nice about giving away stuff like this. And it's only 3 or 4 days before release. It kind of gets the word out there and lets us share this type of information with you. Okay, so our tank divisions are not going to be available until Phase B, at which point I think we kind of want to come out swinging. Early on, I'm just going to put boots on the ground. We're just going to go massive numbers of just Panzer IVs. We'll probably go with some officers as well to support them. Although, no, you know what? I'm going to use the support officers. I have not done that before. These are also Phase B, and we'll just have you kind of tucked behind the tanks. So we're not using these. They're not going to be quite as expensive. These only cost 45, which means we can get more Panzer IVs out. Then I think we're also going to bring out a couple of Panthers as well. We're not going to have quite as many of... In fact, should we just go with Panthers rather than Panzers? Because we totally could. You know what? I think we will. We're going to go all out on the Panthers because they are just stronger. And then Phase C... Oh, no, and we want a King Tiger. We definitely want a King Tiger. Phase C, we want all the King Tigers. And... there are Tigers as well. Wait, the Tigers have less armor piercing than the Panthers and slightly more armor. I think the Panthers are a better choice than the Tigers. Yeah, this will do. Then I think we're just going to like load up on Panthers. Panther A's. I mean, we could bring out... Oh wait, these are level 2 Tigers. Oh, because they're command. Well, we could get a command Tiger and then Panthers. So this is a super heavy tank collection. No tanks in Phase A. We can't. They're not available. Phase A tanks tend to be soft as hell, and anything which sneezes on them kills them. Like, against some enemies, they are kind of nasty, especially in... I guess in Phase A, anti-tank is kind of limited, but... yeah. There is one group who gets a captured American tank in Phase A, and it's like an armor piercing 17, armor 15 or something like that. You can do a lot of damage with that guy. I played with him against Uldrahill. I took out like half of Uldrahill's army with that one tank until he eventually did manage to kill him. Phase B needs command. Yeah, I'm going to be using support units for command rather than tanks, so we're just going for raw firepower and then using the support to back them up. Then we are also going to want some supply trucks. Firefly, that would be the one. Armor 11. Okay, not quite as heavy as I thought. It's pretty strong anti-tank though. Because I do remember just going absolutely to town on Uldrahill's tanks until he managed to outflank me. Alright, anti-tank weapons. Again, I am not a big fan of the Panzerschrecks, so we're going to go with the packs. We're going to go with one unit in Phase A. And I think we're just going to go with the Jagdpanzers in B. Like, I'm not expecting to be doing much forest fighting. Except, do we want one more? Shall I be really risky and have no anti-tank in Phase A? Because we have the Panzer Grenadiers who can have some. No, that's too risky. That's way too risky. We'll go for the Pack 38s. I'm wondering if we want the Pack 40s. Because they are pretty strong. Armor piercing 15. See you at that 22nd. This division is a lot of fun if you like tanks. Like, this division would, as you saw, will get chewed up by my Scottish division, but that's because I have some of the most powerful anti-tank in the game. Purposefully so. I've played a couple of early games, and everyone really loves tanks. And I love killing tanks. Why Jagdpanzers with so many great tanks? Because I want more tanks, honestly. They're all mobile. This is going to be a super duper mobile force. And I don't really want to entrench, which is kind of what you're doing with the Pack 40s. I mean, yes, we need something to hold the line in case things go horribly wrong. But frankly, if we get to that stage, then things have gone really, really, really horribly wrong. Do we want anti-air in Phase A? That kind of depends on what planes we get in Phase A, because we can get Messerschmitts, so I think we will take those. And then I think I'm just going to take Phase B fighters. I'm going to put more planes in the sky. Experience doesn't seem to matter that much for aircraft. I'd rather just have more planes, because they'll inevitably get shot down. So yes, we have very good anti-air coverage, so I don't think we particularly need it in Phase A. We'll just use our own fighter to shoot down their planes. Which means that we can go for the more mobile tier 1 Gepards. And then I might actually take some Flak 41s. So these can be the super heavy anti-tanks. You know what? This is a better idea. We use these as the super heavy anti-tanks. Because we're taking fighters, so we have our mobile anti-air. We don't necessarily need them ourselves. Do we want area denial? This is also anti-infantry. Yeah, I will definitely be taking artillery, don't worry. Yeah, Panzer Grenadiers are not about their infantry. They're about the mobile infantry, and they have good anti-infantry capabilities thanks to the preponderance of MG42s, or machine guns. But they are expensive. Like the infantry for the... Actually, these... Oh, the officers are only 15. Yeah, their regular infantry is 55. Jeez. The Scottish infantry are 20. Okay, they are super expensive. So, once again, the question, do I want more... Well, we've got all the Pack 41s that we can... Or Flak 41s that we can get. We could get another Gepard. We could get a... Flak gun. I kind of want one of these because they're just really good at just mopping up. Oh, no. You know what? We're not going to get you. We're going to get one of the Flak 41s in Phase C because we are actually limited in the total number of these cards that we can have, and we have no artillery yet. So we probably want artillery over anti-air because we have a lot of fighters. In fact, I might even just get rid of you. Okay, so we can have 3 artillery pieces. I'm not convinced by these level 1... Actually, a rocket launcher. Range 1,600. So for me, the most important stat for artillery is range. So 1,600 is acceptable. 1,200 is too short. This is the range of an anti-tank gun. Getting your artillery vehicles into range of anti-tank is just a recipe for disaster. Because even they have basically no armor, and they'll just get one-shotted by a fly. So range by far is, for me, the most important stat here. So all of these are kind of underwhelming. They are only mortars, they're not proper artillery, unlike the Wesp, which has a range of 2,400. That is more acceptable. So we'll go for a Wesp. And then we'll probably go for Hummel, which is even... Wow, 2,800. That's the longest range I've seen. So I think we're just going to fill up on Hummel. I don't think I want these guys. I mean, yes, they'll be able to keep pace with the tanks, but so will they. They're self-propelled artillery. We could get Nabalwerfer, but we have so many machine guns and things that I don't think taking out infantry is going to be that much of a problem. Who had 4K range? Because these are infinite range. They're off map. Their range is only limited by how far he can see. Not in this deck, okay. Then we have our Air Force, which we've already done. It's just massive numbers of fighters. Alright, let's rename this battle group to... No tanks. Save. Although why I say that, I don't know. Because when you're actually doing a multiplayer game... when the enemy's looking at your battle group, all they can see is question mark, question mark, question mark. Because I'm always kind of dubious about naming my battle groups and saying, this is my tank deck. I don't really need to do that. But I'm going to anyway. Okay, so this is the overview of this army. You can see we have a couple of unused squares, particularly for the anti-air. We have fighters, so I don't need it. And then artillery, just because we're not really going for the long-range defensive posturing. We are definitely all about the movement here. This will be very mobile, so I might need to turn down the speed a little bit. We have some infantry. We haven't focused infantry that highly. We could actually get rid of some of the infantry. Storm Pioneers, and then have some more artillery. Nah, it's fine. We do need something to hold the line, so we have something to withdraw to.